This chapter is chapter 18, and it's called Alone Again. I slunk to the car like a stray cat. I wasn't completely sorry about the things I'd said to Aunt Queenie, but I wished I'd been nicer about saying them. "Well, what do you think?" Uncle Bert asked as he eased the car out of the traffic. "About what?" I replied, too stubborn to let on I knew exactly what he meant. "The workshop." "It's all right, I guess." Uncle Bert gave me a sly grin and started whistling off key. I watched the mileage computer on the dashboard, its numbers flashing red and changing crazily as if it couldn't make up its mind. I heaved a deep sigh. I'd been riding a roller coaster of emotions for so long, I was crazier than the numbers. "It was Aunt Queenie's idea for you to visit the workshop," said Uncle Bert. I know you two don't see eye to eye, but she's a good-hearted person and a good wife." When I didn't answer, he went on. "What you said the other night about her being so organized, it's something I've learned to accept in 10 years of marriage. You'll be a lot happier when you can accept it too." I guess I was a real brat. Understandable, in view of what you've been through. Let me tell you a secret about Queenie. Keeping everything in tip-top shape is her way of dealing with not being able to have children. The time and energy and love she would have given a child have been directed toward her home, her flowers, and a dozen worthy causes. I closed my eyes. That explained why Aunt Queenie was such a fuss budget, but it didn't help me feel better. I arrived at school in the middle of fourth hour. After getting a pass from the office, I went down the hall to Avenel's locker and took out the math book before going on to the gym. If Miss Cooper was in a halfway decent mood, maybe she'd excuse me from dressing out and I could do my homework before lunch. As soon as I entered the gym, I saw Avenel in the far end. She was playing volleyball, but she must have had one eye on the door because she started waving. I waved back at the ball as the ball sailed over the net and hit the floor with her feet. "Way to go, turkey!" yelled Georgina Gregory, picking up the ball and tossing it angrily over the net. She might have been talking to Avenel, but she was glaring at me. Miss Cooper blew her whistle and called, "Gregory, watch your mouth. Shackelford, keep your eye on the ball. Jensen, bring me your pass." When I took it to her, she glanced at it and said, "All right, go sit down somewhere." I climbed halfway up and sat in the bleachers, and as I opened the math book, an envelope dropped out into my lap. I picked it up and read the address. Trezane Shackelford, 165320, HU 3-A-499, Missouri Training Center for Men, P.O. Box 7, Cumberland, Missouri 65277. It was a letter to Avenel's father in prison. Guiltily, I stuffed it back into the book. I went to work, but it was impossible to convert decimals to fractions, with the girls yelling and Miss Cooper blowing her whistle. I gathered up my book and papers and went to the locker room. I was on the last problem when the bell rang. A few seconds later, the door banged open and several girls hustled in, their voices bouncing off the wall. Among them was Georgina, dribbling the volleyball. "We've got Michael Jordan in the girls' locker room," Sarah Ward said, laughing. She waved her arms like a basketball player and tried to steal the ball. Georgina, showing off, started dribbling harder. Sarah couldn't get the ball with her hands, so she kicked it hard and it came hurtling across to my bench and slammed into the math book. The book, my papers, and Avenel's letter went scooting across the floor. I jumped up and made a grab for the letter, but Lori Nicholson beat me to it. "Hey, you guys, look at this," she said. "A love letter to Avenel's brother." "Give me that," I cried, lunging for the envelope. Lori clutched it to her chest and looked me up and down. So you got a crush on Trezane Shackelford? Please, I said, give it back. She turned away from me and read the address. Hey, she yelled, this isn't for Tree. Not unless he's in prison. What? Cried Georgina and Sarah at the same time. When Laurie held the letter up for them to see, I grabbed for it again and missed. She tossed it to Georgina, saying, Airmail! Georgina caught the letter and looked at it. Must be Tree's dad. With an evil grin, she added, maybe he's an axe murderer. Ooh, that's creepy, squealed Sarah. The door opened and in walked Avenel. Georgina glanced from me to her with a smirk, then shoved the letter to me. To Avenel, she said, so your dad's a convict? Your weird old friend here just spilled the beans. Laughing, she and the other girls headed for the showers. The letter was a hot coal in my shaking hands. I gaped at Avenel, who stood still as a statue in the sunbeam from the skylight. Her emerald eyes were shooting sparks, and her orange hair was a ball of fire. She streaked over to me and seized the letter. You had no right, she gasped. I didn't. How could you, Del Rita? She demanded in a harsh whisper. How could you show them my letter? You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was choosing you to be my friend. That's why my dad went to prison, you know, because he was a friend to the wrong person. I blinked back tears at the look of rage on the face of my one and only friend. Dad didn't rob a bank or kill somebody, she went on in that awful raspy whisper. He drove the truck to help a buddy move furniture. Only the furniture didn't belong to that fellow. He was just using my dad to steal it. Avenel, listen to me. I didn't show those girls the letter. So how come they got to see it? Why should I believe you when the judge didn't believe my dad? Avenel's voice broke and she pushed past me. Helplessly, I watched her snatch up her school clothes and head for a stall. A cloud blotted out the sun and the locker room grew dark as another swarm of girls came into to get dressed. I sat on a bench feeling naked, even though I had on more clothes than anybody in the room. Georgina had succeeded in scaring off Avenel. Not in the way I'd expected, but the results were the same. Avenel ignored me, and I was afraid that if I forced myself on her, there'd be another ugly scene. At lunch, we sat at opposite ends of the cafeteria, neither of us with a tray. In math, 5th hour, she sailed past me as if I were invisible. When the bell rang after 7th hour, I went out the back door. I was embarrassed by all the lovesick couples on the low brick wall, but I drew a deep breath and plunged on past. It was either go this way or go my regular route, and it would hurt too much to see Avenel's house and not be welcome there. Crunching along through the leaves, I felt an overwhelming sadness. Mom had loved raking leaves, so she hadn't minded when Punky and I rolled around in her leaf stacks, scattering them to the wind. As I reached Uncle Bert's, a van pulled in the drive, and Punky got out. The sun pinpointed the thin layer of sawdust on his whiskers. "Bye, Punky!" came a chorus of voices from the van. "See you in the morning!" "Yeah," said Punky as he tipped his cowboy hat. "See you in the morning!" All at once, an arm shot out the window, waving furiously, and I saw Barney's round face beaming at me. "My wife!" he called. "Barney!" cried Punky, shaking his fist. "She's my girl, you old goat!" The van pulled away, but not before Barney called out, "My wife!" Punky jewed out his bottom lip, and I put my arm around, saying, Did Barney give you a hard time today? Nope, said Punky, tucking his lunchbox under his arm, heading toward the house. He might win. I stood still and watched him go. Punky had a van load of new friends after one day in the outside world. And what did I have? That night, I hid in the bathroom to carve, hoping the act would soothe me as it had so many times before. I held the ugly blob of a snowman in one hand and Walt's perfect swan in the other. They symbolized the difference between what I was and what I wanted to be, and I had no idea how to get from one to the other. I started working on Herkemeyer's wings with the bee tool, but it might as well have been a chainsaw. My mind kept going back to Georgina's cruelly exposing Avenel's secret. The situation looked hopeless. I couldn't blame Avenel for thinking I'd stabbed her in the back. I squeezed my eyes shut and a tear rolled down my cheeks. Avenel was my first real friend, and losing her felt a little like losing Mom and Dad. I thought of Brownie, the big shepherd dog we'd had at the farm. Brownie was a good pet, playful and gentle, but he'd killed a chicken, and Dad gave him away. He's tasted blood, Dad had said, and he'll always want more. Well, I'd tasted Avenel's friendship, and I wanted more. I knew the longer I waited to talk to her, the harder it would be to make things right. But was it even possible to make things right? Would she ever talk to me again? No, I thought sadly, remembering those blazing green eyes. Her humiliation in the locker room had been complete. My fingers slipped and I stabbed myself with the bee tool. I wiped at the blood and toilet tissue, then put Herkemeyer away so I wouldn't make a mess of him too. I'd been a loner before, and I should have been able to pick up where I left off, but it wasn't that easy. School was torture now. Avenel wasn't chummy with anyone else, but she avoided me. Once, when we came to face to face in the restroom, she turned away quickly. I guess looking at me made her sick. Every time I had to use the math book, I half expected her to sneak up behind me and accuse me of snooping in her locker. I started lurking in the classroom so I wouldn't have to face her in the hall. At the last minute, when I had to venture out, I scurried along, hunched over, as if hiding a brick in my shirt. Sunday at church, it was the same story. Avenel wouldn't look in my direction, but she took a special interest in Miss Myrtle Chambers, helping the fragile old lady up the steps and finding the pages in her hymnal. The rest of her family was friendly, though. Bertie sat with Punky and me before going to her class, and when the service ended, Mrs. Shackelford asked me how Punky liked working. Okay, I said, but that was a lie. Punky was in seventh heaven in the workshop, and I decided he no longer needed me at all. Tree said, he had a great time at the athletic field yesterday. I showed him how to shoot baskets, and his aim is terrific. No wonder, I thought. He's got the best horn-flinging arm in the country. You ought to come with him next time, Tree said. We'd let you be water girl or sweep off the track. I knew he was teasing, but the words irritated me. No, thanks, I said. I'm busy on Saturdays. As soon as I could, I went to the car. A wave of homesickness washed over me when the smell of the upholstered seats reminded me of Dad's antique shop. I watched Avenel help Miss Myrtle to Elsie Golden's car, climb in the back seat, and ride away with them. Soon the rest of the Shacklefords came out. Tree carried Bertie in one arm and hung on to Eddie's hand. His mother, holding Gordy, laughed when the wind caught Randolph's papers and he started chasing them. My mind played back in slow motion the last glimpse I'd had of my parents at Silver Dollar City, Dad backing up the trailer and Mom hanging out the window and blowing kisses. More than anything, I wish they'd come walking out of the church with Punky. I ache to have a whole family again, to be like we were before the accident.